Welcome everyone to the Ivy podcast. I am your host, Wen Stinger. In this diversity, equity, and inclusion or DE&I channel, I want to connect with industry experts and leaders in the movement towards workplace equality and talk education, barriers, and strategy. I'm pleased to welcome today's guest, LaShaun Solomon. LaShaun is an industry expert committed to promoting DE&I in the staffing industry. For the past 14 years, she has developed and implemented DE&I strategies for Fortune 50 companies. As the head of DE&I partnership development and strategy for Pyramid Consulting, LaShaun oversees Pyramid's intentionally inclusive efforts around recruitment and engagement. As an extension to her role, she serves as the chair of the Technology Association of Georgia DE&I Society. LaShaun, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Wen, and thank you for having me. So excited to be here.
I'm very excited to talk with you more. I want to start with, can you start by telling us a little bit more about your career journey? What brought you into the world of diversity and inclusion work?
Absolutely. So before I made the transition into staffing, which happened in January of this year, I spent 13 years working in telecom. And I started out at Cox Communications, where I developed and implemented marketing campaigns reaching over 1 million customers. I then moved over to HBO, home of Game of Thrones, True Blood, House of the Dragons. And I managed distribution partnerships with various cable operators across the US that generated $66 million in annual revenue. Then I spent some time at Comcast, started out managing distribution and community partnerships that increased digital literacy in underserved communities and also grew Comcast's annual revenue over $8 million. And then while at Comcast, I transitioned to the advertising arm of Comcast known as Effective, where I led training on partnership development strategies, selling skills, products and tools, and supporting over 1,700 ad sales employees, as well as operational initiatives supporting our go-to-market strategies. And then from Effective, I moved over to NBC Universal and managed the pre-sale and post-sale processes of over $30 million in marketing partnerships with the world's most prominent brands in auto, finance, insurance, studios, and digital. Now, throughout all of that, my DEI journey officially started in 2020. And it's when I found myself in this membership-based organization that was a nonprofit, and it was supporting women in media and telecom. And what I noticed was none of the women that I saw being recognized and celebrated looked like me. And this experience ignited my passion for advocating for representation. And I wanted to start my pursuit to open doors for other women of color, create intentional professional development programs, and then also dedicate my gifts to support underserved communities. Then in 2019, I became the youngest and first African-American president of the Southeast chapter of that same organization that initially lacked representation of women of color. While I was at Comcast, I became the first female ally to co-chair the LGBTQ Employee Resource Group. My drive for creating inclusive and respectful spaces led to my executive leadership involvement with the Technology Association of Georgia DE&I Society, where I led the organization's mission in launching new programs that amplified diverse voices in tech. So in short, throughout my myriad of experiences and several pivots, I wanted to bring other people that looked like me on the journey. And I also wanted to raise awareness of the fact that representation matters. And there are more people to bring to the table.
That's fantastic. I mean, just to think about, finding an opportunity where, you don't see people represented authentically and accurately, and then becoming the president of that organization and paving the way, not only as a member of a diverse community, but as an ally as well. That's just, it's absolutely fantastic. And, speaking of allyship, you and I both know, allyship, it's just pivotal in inclusion work. So my question to you is, how do we encourage more people to be allies, and where do they go to learn how to do that?
Absolutely. I want to start by saying that allyship is a verb.
Mhm.
It takes action. To be an effective ally, you have to take action. And when it comes to learning, one must take the proactive approach to educate themselves and also do some introspection to ask themselves the hard questions and being able to better understand their own biases, whether they are conscious or unconscious. And then once you understand your own biases, look to see how you can overcome them and practice that each day. So, in the workplace, we can all be better allies by investing in colleagues that don't look like us. And that's advocating for them, asking them about their career future. What is it that they want to aspire to do? What skill set would they like to learn? And then connecting them with the right people within the organization to help them acquire that skill, volunteering these individuals for stretch projects so they can get the visibility and the experience, because ultimately that is how we are all able to grow, not only as an organization but also how we can elevate others.
Absolutely. I mean, it is, we think, I think many people who either are looking to be an ally or not sure where to start kind of think that, that idea of, well, what can I do? I'm not a part of any of these diverse communities. So what does my opinion matter? And we absolutely need allies to bring us along, and to be allies for other groups ourselves. As you and I are both in the contingent labor industry, and dealing with contract labor is kind of interesting because while it makes up nearly half of the workforce population in the United States, we still don't really do a lot with diversity and inclusion for the contingent labor space. There's this kind of void of like who's responsible for their belonging. Is it the supplier, the staffing company that is their employer? Is it the client company where they work? Is it a combination of the two? And at your time at Pyramid, I was really fascinated by this because you helped launch one of the first of its kind employee relation group for the contract population. I'd love for you to tell us a little bit more about how that came about and how's it grown since you launched.
Yes, I would start by saying it's one, I'm very fortunate that our CEO, Sanjeev Taraf, and our Chief Customer Officer, Namita Taraf, are huge champions and have been carrying the torch and advocating for diversity, equity, and inclusion at Pyramid. So it was extremely helpful to have their support coming in to the organization. And our employee relations group program is called Belong In. I won't take credit for the name. That name was already established before I joined. And when I joined the company, I took Belong In and then developed the seven groups within Belong In, those seven employee resource groups to celebrate and elevate the diversity of our contingent workforce, and also including our corporate employees on that journey and in the process. And since our launch, we started out with a public announcement on MLK Day about what we're doing to further our commitment to creating an intentionally inclusive community. And then from there on after, we had special announcements about each of our employee resource groups. In February, we announced Black Culture Alliance for Black History Month. In March, we announced Women of Pyramid Consulting. In May, we announced Pan Asian Net. In June, we announced our PRISM ERG. Oh my gosh. And then in September, we just launched Latin Tech. And this month, for ending, we announced Able In. And then in November, we'll be announcing Vet Connect. So we have a total of seven employee resource groups for our contingent workforce, our consultants that are deployed at customer sites, as well as our corporate employees. And in order to do that, it took engaging leadership at all levels, and then also rallying those key stakeholders throughout the organization. And today, 19% of our employee base, our contingent workforce, has joined. one or several employee resource groups. And our goal is to double that number in 2023.
Wow, 19% already, and just more and more. I think that's fantastic. I mean, it's something that we've been looking in the industry for quite some time of, where can we provide, the belonging and inclusion for this contract labor force. I wanted, maybe you know this answer, but do you find that moving to more of a remote or hybrid work schedule kind of made that a little bit easier to pull together?
I am a huge supporter of hybrid work. And I
Yeah.
just think that's because I just think it's because you have to look at the transition
Mhm.
that the world has had to make due to the pandemic. If there's any silver lining in this, it's companies realizing that we can still get the work done with people not in one building from 8 to 5. It
Yep.
can still be done, with people working in different places and working remotely. Additionally, it makes it a lot easier for people to connect with others because imagine if you wanted to get to know someone, you had to finalize a date, then pick a location. And if you're meeting for coffee, you have to get ready. You have to have all your talking points together. You got to time out traffic. And then when you finally get there, you have the meeting, then you have to commute somewhere else. Whereas now it's a simple Teams meeting or a Zoom.
Mhm.
And you can still have your 30-minute talk and maximize your time. And then also you can schedule another one after that. So when I think about hybrid work or even remote work, there's an increase in productivity there with people who, of course, can manage their time accordingly. And so with that, how I maximize my time and that opportunity was reaching out to people that didn't look like me and setting up time to have those 20, 30-minute conversations just to get to know more people and for me to learn more about myself. And so I saw that as a huge positive in being able to leverage that work environment. And what I'm also starting to see are articles around how to manage remote work for other people and how that can show up, especially for people from historically marginalized groups. So if we were to go back to the original intent behind employee resource groups, it was to create a safe space for people who don't feel safe in a work environment, right? Because they're dealing with microaggressions or maybe even macroaggressions. And now with employee resource groups, they have a safe space where they can discuss that amongst like-minded individuals. And as a result to remote work or even hybrid work, people have found safety in not having to directly engage with microaggressions that they would normally engage with if they were in the workplace in person. And so that's another concept that I believe employers need to be aware of is how remote work can also benefit others who may not have felt safe coming to work every day.
Mhm.
And then also there was a recent article I read about cameras off because some, depending on the culture, you may have a culture that requires cameras on all the time, or maybe some flexibility there. But if you are an individual that may have a disability, having your camera on all the time can actually cause more distractions
Mhm.
for you as you work. And so, in addition to this new landscape of how we work in every day, we also have to be mindful of how does this work, whether it's hybrid, in person, or fully remote, how does that impact individuals from different groups? And how do they have to adjust?
Yep. Well, and I love that you bring up, the camera on, camera off policy in companies. I've even experienced in previous employers, they we not, I mean, in addition to disability or accessibility, there are individuals who the idea of having their camera on at all time affects their mental health. It really affects their anxiety. It affects all of that, and so you know managers being flexible with that requirement. Maybe there's, sometimes there's an important meeting, and yes, we would like everyone's camera on, but not requiring employees to do it every single time. Because sometimes that's just nerve-wracking to make someone be on at all times.
Mhm. And another thing I noticed is I discovered, hey, there are blue lights radiating from my computer
Yes.
screen that I am ingesting every day.
Yep.
I did not know that was a thing until 2020.
Yeah.
And I when I was working, I started to get headaches because I was on my computer all the time versus when I would be in the office, I would take time to do a lap around, speak to everyone, and engage people. I could take breaks. But when I was on the computer nonstop all day, it started to impact my sight. And that's when I discovered blue light filters. That
Mhm.
is a thing.
Yep.
And 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 these are just other nuances that I don't think other people take into account as you transition the way you work. So,
Yeah. Well, and as you say that, I'm noticing the blue light reflecting off my glasses because I have a blue light filter on my glasses. And that was the funny thing of like right in the beginning of the pandemic. I had it was a thing that we all noticed as soon as we got on camera. Those of us that had heavy blue light filter, then suddenly your eye was just blue, and it was distracting. And so then we became, people started to get self-conscious of that and go for glasses that don't have a blue light filter because it doesn't show up well on a Zoom camera. But then we're affecting our eyesight. And so, yeah, we've, I think as a workforce, we've all kind of learned to level out those things and have more empathy. But that's the important thing I think we need to make sure managers are doing in the go forward is having that empathy. And actually that leads into my next question. So as we talk about DE&I in the workspace, so we're seeing companies who want to partner. They want to bring inclusion to their extended workforce. They're limited with that risk of co-employment. From your perspective, how do we help clients mitigate co-employment while still providing inclusion?
well, I also just want to just I want to start by saying the whole concept of co-employment and and how contingent workers show up for our clients is still a learning. I'm still learning all of that personally because I've never been exposed to it before.
Mhm.
And what I can say for Pyramid Consulting, the consultants we have deployed at customer sites are registered as an employee of Pyramid.
Mhm.
As their employer of record, our consultants have the option to engage in our Belong In program in the events that we offer with that program. Therefore, in my mind, I would see that the co-employment risk is not an issue because it's very clear that as their employer of record, we are fostering that inclusion. We are creating that community for our consultants because frankly, we're responsible for helping them get redeployed.
Mhm.
We want to make sure they finish that project. And we are continuing to invest in them, not only from a professional development standpoint with access to our learning library, but also with connecting them with other like-minded individuals that may be with a different host company, but they have some shared similarities or backgrounds.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I love, again, I love that uniqueness of bringing that inclusion from the staffing perspective. It's something I hope we see repeated more and more in the industry. Today, before we end our conversation, um, I'd love to hear from you. What's one takeaway that you'd want to put in the audience's ear?
My one takeaway is that DEI isn't just the job or responsibility of one person. It actually takes everyone to do their part to create a more inclusive and equitable world. And if you don't know how or where to start, just raise your hand and ask. You know, when you and we talked a lot about what are the steps that an individual can take to get started, and that starts with education, educating educating on yourself and your own biases, whether they are unconscious or conscious, and then taking action to support people that look different from you, because it takes all of us to be in order to create sustainable and meaningful change. And I also personally just want to thank you. I tell you this all the time when I am always learning from you. And when I attended my first VicuraCon conference and I sat in on your DE&I breakfast, I was blown away about all that I didn't know about the LGBTQ plus community, and basically how employers can be more inclusive about supporting those employees. So thank you for always being an educator as well.
Well, thank you, LaShaun. I've absolutely loved our interactions and how we continue to learn from each other about where we can be allies in our different communities. And I want to thank you again. Thank you again for coming on the podcast today, and thank you for sharing your story with us.
Thank you.